Right, let us resume our meeting. Mr. Lau? Well, let us start. Kenneth, pass 3, please. Thank you, Chairman. Pass 3 is in respect of the administration of public subscription permits for charitable fundraising activities. I think I will focus on 2 areas. The first, apart from flag days, there are permits for charitable fundraising activities. The second part is on the situations discovered by the auditing process. Now, in the report, paragraph 3.9, Ms. Ip has spoken on this. The applicant may not know whether he or she has to obtain a permit. The Summary Offences Ordinance covers various activities which require permits, and the wording can have different kinds of interpretation. In the past, legal advice from DOJ has to be sought as many as up to 300 or so occasions. In 2015-16, if you may refer to paragraph 3.10, you sought legal advice on 21 cases, and as a result, there was a delay in the issuing of the permit. I have 2 questions in this regard. Have you categorized the different kinds of legal advice, say for example, and then put them on your one-stop finder so that the applicants may know whether they need or they don't need a permit? This is the first question. Ms. Ip, on our website, the areas covered by the permits and also examples of activities that require permits are put on our website, and the whole application form is put in the, on the website. In response to the recommendation of the Director of Audit, we will do more in this regard. This is one of the measures. As for legal advice on a public place, whether it's included or not, say whether the school is a public place, the DOJ is reviewed that a school is not a public place. As for the ground floor of the headquarters of the HSBC, it is a passage and it is a public place. Now, we have already done the work, and we will consolidate our experience, and we will also look into our legal advice, which we have obtained in the past, and then we will set out a set of guidelines on the coverage of the provision. We will spell out the places that are subject to application very often, and also definition for badges, tokens, so on and so forth, and what are the areas covered under CAP 228. We will have a set of guidelines to augment the information that we have already disclosed on our website. The definition of a public place is a point of view and is subject to interpretation. Now, under 3.9b, under the Summary Offences Ordinance, the definition of badges, tokens, or similar articles, I have no interest in looking into 300-odd pieces of legal advice. As for similar articles, are they similar to badges or tokens or what? Can you share with us what is the advice of the DOJ in respect of similar articles and its interpretation. As for similar articles, now it refers to badges and tokens. You have to know what organization and who. Similar articles. Now we have asked whether on the cast of a film star there is a name on it, or a T-shirt where the name of an organization is not printed, or there is no badge, a T-shirt which has no badge, then it's not similar articles. So if they sell a T-shirt with no badge or name, then it is not under the Summary Offences Ordinance, and therefore they have to apply for a temporary hawker license. If the T-shirt has a name or badge of the organization, or it is a memorabilia of a certain memorabilium of a certain thing, organization, then it is not general article for sale. Now, if you want to seek legal advice, how much time do you need in addition in the whole application process? Well, it depends on the nature of the case. It depends on the nature of articles, and also the point we need to clarify and whether there are precedents said by the member, and it's also said in the paper. We have declined a number of cases in which legal advice has been sought, and sometimes it's needed for the DOJ to consider the case. But there is a time limit. They have to organize a certain activity at a certain time, and usually we'll give them a response ASAP. And let me now turn the question. Let me now turn to another part of the report. Within 90 days of the completion of the event, the organization will have to submit an audited report. That's in paragraph 3.12 of the Director of Audit report. Now, under 3.12, several scenarios were described. A. 6. Apologies, Mr. Chairman. 6 audited reports were long overdue, ranging from 216 days to 429 days. And also B, Roman small 1, 658 reports, averaging 43 days delay. Now this is a large-scale project, and you know what that large-scale project was. And why 90 days? Is it? Do you think it is appropriate? Is it 90 days was the result of a discussion. It's a balance. We have to consider the time required for an audited report, yet we also need to respond to the public because they want to see the report, financial report ASAP. As for late submissions, I want to explain that some organizations have honorary auditors. They do it. The auditors do it free of charge. Now some say that the auditor is free of charge, and the auditor will only do it during the non-busy days. Some get an auditor, and they have to pay the auditor. But when the auditor is very busy, the auditor may not be able to do it on time. As for large-scale fundraising activities, quite a lot of time is required for doing the counting. So 90 days, a 90-day period is a balance. And whether we should adopt the accrual approach or not, that's another question. As for an organization which is not able to submit a report within 90 days, we will ask about it. We'll talk to the organization and try to find out what difficulties they have. We follow up each and every case. Thank you. I'm not saying that 90 days aren't appropriate. But since the organizations have so many problems or difficulties, then you have to consider whether it should be 90 days or 120 days. The public, of course, want to see the report ASAP. I also had an experience in organizing a one-off activity. You have to collect all the invoices and receipts, and then you conduct an auditing. That has to go through certain procedures. What sort of auditing activities do you require? You want them to have an income statement, and then you conduct an audit on that. Say the organizer will have to have the income and expenditure accounts, or there are other accounts required before the auditing can be conducted. The director. Let me respond to the first question first. Whether 90 days are appropriate. In the audit report, about 55% are able to hand in the report on time, and 28% are able to hand in the report within a month. So if we extend it to 120 days, then it will cover 83% of the cases. We follow up each and every case. As for the coverage of the audit report, that would include the specific activity, the total expenditure, total income, the income and expenditure accounts will have to be included. And that's in respect of the expenditure by the organization in the details. Say, for example, they hire a venue. How much do they spend on the venue? That's what people want. They want transparency. Chairman, concerning the opinion of the auditor, what sort of wording will that be? Can you give me a sample for the committee? The format of the audited report. You can black out the names. Yes, it will provide an example. This is also on paragraph 3.12. B2, B Roman 2. For very late reports, 76 were late for more than 3 months. In one case, the permittee submitted the audited report 4 years after the last event day. Your deadline is 90 days or 3 months. And this one was late by a very long time. Can you explain? I know it's very special. Why 76 were late for more than 3 months and a case was less than 4 years? As for the late reports, seriously late reports, the organization, having organized the event once, may not organize the next event. We urge them to submit a report. They are unable to provide the report, or they are a small organization. They can't get an auditor to do the work. And as the matter is delayed, it is not possible to conduct an audited report. In respect of such cases, I just want to inform members that apart from issuing letters of alert, we also have a new measure. We want to know clearly, we make it very clear to the organization that we will put that on record in respect of the late report, and we will not issue any new permit to them. This is a very important preventive measure. If an organization has not submitted a report, if they have already lodged another application, we will delay the processing or suspend the processing. In April, in our application form and also on our website. If there is any black record or record breach of the rules and conditions, then we will not process the application. As for organizations which have not complied with the permit conditions, that is a kind of deterrent. Now, the director, if you say that the organization does not submit the report, then in the next application you will not process that application. When was this measure introduced? Chairman, in our licensing arrangements, we have this condition. Case 1, in the Director of Audit report, we do have such an arrangement. We spell it out very clearly to the applicants. In April, we put in the wording. In 2016, at the committee, the Lotteries Fund Committee, we started the discussion on this. Over the years, we have kept reviewing transparency and accountability, and we keep adding new permit conditions. Now, if you look at the application form, you will have noticed that we have been adding new permit conditions. We hope the organizations understand that they have to comply. Now, when an organization prepares for the income expenditure accounts, they may not get a professional to prepare the accounts because the organizations may be too small. Now, in your guidance notes or reference guideline, do you have any guidelines for them to prepare the income and expenditure accounts? Is it in Appendix E? Does Appendix E provides the example? Just a one-page example. This is the income and expenditure accounts. This is a sample. As for the audited report, it should be more detailed. We have been talking to the HKIA. In fact, the HKIA has issued practice notes 850 for the auditors.
If the audit report say the auditor thinks that the accounts are messy and refuses to reach an opinion on the accounts, then what kind of follow-up action are you going to take? Director, Chairman, will follow up the report with the organizer if there are indeed problems. As I said, when we receive another application from the same organizer, we may not issue the PSP. This is what we do as follow-up. And whether there can be other conditions to be imposed on the audited report, and that is whether we can ask auditors to do more for us to help us. In fact, we are going to have more discussions with the Hong Kong ICPA later. I will ask another question from another area. 3.14 of the audit report. I understand that you inspect these activities from time to time. Last year, and I'm talking about June 2015 to September 2016, you conducted 60 inspections. And I can see that organizers may apply for the PSP, but then they do not show up. You don't know what has happened. There is just no show. What follow-up actions do you do with these? And I'm talking about 3.14a. Director, we took the action. We inspected the activities and we followed up every case, and we asked the organizer, why is it that the inspectors did not see anyone at venue, and we took stock of the situation. Sometimes the organizers had a problem with the deployment of manpower, and sometimes it was because of inclement weather, and the activity just could not be conducted, and there was difficulty in recruiting volunteers or fundraisers. And there was a special situation where the activity had concluded or had not started when we were there. We took stock of all the information collected, and in responding to the audit report, we will work together with the Lands Department and the FEHD. And with regard to repeated no-show cases, we would like to exchange information among ourselves. Say they had hired a venue but there was no show. We would take up these cases with the Lands Department to see whether enforcement action is possible. Kenneth, any more questions? Not for the moment. I will give the time to other members first. Mr. Lam Cheuk Ting. Thank you, Chairman. I would like to concentrate on the administrative cost of fundraising activities, and I'm referring to paras 3.17 onwards. I'm aware, Mr. Chairman, that with regard to flag days, there is this condition that the cost should not exceed 10% of the total revenue of the event. First, I'd like to ask whether organizers have to submit a budget to you upon application. Chairman, we require applicants to state in the application form the details of the event, but with regard to income and expenditure, they just have to submit the audited report after the event is over. Chairman, you can say that it is capped at 10%, and if it is exceeded, you can take follow-up action. But there is no guarantee of the funds that can be raised. It depends on the weather, the manpower, and other factors. And the figures can fluctuate. If there is no estimated figure for them to make an assessment, say, for example, based on experience, they expect to be able to raise so much money and the expected administrative cost is so much, can you consider asking them to provide a rough estimate at the time of application? Of course, the estimate can be subject to variation. Director, Chairman, about flag days, we say it should not exceed 10%. And as I explained, the format is quite standardized. When organizers come to apply, of course, they have an estimate themselves. They will tell us the target funds that can be raised, and they would tell us the purpose of collecting the fund. But then the audited report will be the exact accurate record. But we thank member for this question because we also want them to come up with an estimate. And so we would say the cost should not be over 10% of that estimate. Well, actually, that was an introduction. My concern is not about flag days. My concern is actually about the absence of a cap on administrative costs for activities other than flag days. May I refer to Table 6? Most of the expenses, which if taken as a percentage of gross proceeds, is usually lower than 20%. That is so from 2012 to 2016. Most of the figures are all right, but some have incurred 20 to 40% of the revenue as administrative cost. To me, that is on the high side. And what is not acceptable is that every year there are activities where the cost is even up to 100% or of the total proceeds, or there are cases where there is actually a deficit. This is very unacceptable. Members of the public are doing charity when they donate money, and they don't know how much the administrative cost is when they make the donations. They want to do a charity act, but then the money goes to the pocket of the administrators or companies. That is far from satisfactory. Let me concentrate on the most exceptional cases. In the year 2015 or 2015 to 16, 4%, a total of 13 activities whereby the cost is 80 to 100% of total proceeds. I find this hard to imagine. Why is the percentage so high? And when you saw that, what follow-up action did you take? Director. Chairman, we have been explaining why it is not possible to stipulate a standard cap on administrative cost. Every year there would be a dozen odd cases where there is a deficit. Sorry, I'm not talking about the cases where there is a deficit. I'm talking about cases where the administrative cost is 80 to 100%. These may be religious activities or public education activities. The fundraising part is a small part of the event. A lot of the cost has gone to the entire activity. They may put a donation box there, nevertheless, but the event includes a fundraising element, so they have to come and seek a PSP. And I'd like to clarify that the administrative cost does not go into the pockets of the administrators. Perhaps it is used for hiring the venue and other organizing work. But it depends on what activity it is, and the administrative cost can vary a lot. Therefore, we cannot have a standard cap. I understand what the director is saying. In 3.20, you also say that amongst the 60 deficit cases you selected, 50 were primarily for public education or religious purposes, and fundraising only form a small part of the events. But what about 10 deficit cases, the activities of which were primarily organized for raising funds for the organization's operation and program? The funds raised, ranging from $400 to $28,000, could not cover the administrative cost. In a certain case, the deficit was up to $20,000, meaning the salary allowance to fundraisers, transportation, etc. could not be covered. These are a totally different category of cases. What is your view and what is your follow-up action? Director. About these 10 deficit cases, their purpose was to support the organization's operation and program. We have reviewed these cases. Some organizations were really small, operating with a small fund, and so they could not get the donations they wanted, and the deficit ranged from $15,000 to $20,000, and they all related to very small fundraising activities. So we're aware of this situation. In our application forms, we draw the applicant's attention to the recruitment of manpower. We say it should have better arrangements, but I must say that these are really small charity activities, and we don't want to stop them from being able to make the applications, but we will remind them of what they should do. Okay, director, if in a certain year there will be this kind of activities which may attract a deficit, and then when they apply again in the following year, will you make reference to their fundraising capacity? Because in a way, the events hurt them in the end because they conduct the activity, but then they sustain a deficit. Will you remind them that they should go for other forms of fundraising activities, or else you cannot support the application? We are talking about public money, aren't we? Thank you for that reminder, member. When organizers put forward applications, I'm sure they are aware of their own track record. As I said, we don't want to make it impossible for such organizers to make applications. Of course, when they come forward, we will review their applications. Small organizers will understand their own situation if they sustain a deficit every time. On the application forms, there will be more and more conditions, and organizers will have to evaluate whether they can comply with all of them. Even if there is a deficit, the organizer may not be flouting the conditions of the PSP, and we wouldn't like to debar them from making future applications. That is not our intention. We hope all well-intending organizers can continue to raise funds. Well, no, Mr. Lam is not saying that, because somehow organizers can cheat by putting the administrative cost at a high level because they can, say, give a lot of money to their own staff, etc. I think Mr. Lam is driving home this point. It is not just the deficit, because the cost may be used to subsidize many different parts of the event. And also, Chairman, according to the report, these 10 cases have paid salary allowance to fundraisers, transportation and audit fees. Such expenditure is spent on staff and relevant people related to the activities. If there is a deficit for a row of 3 years, for example, do you think there is still a good reason for allowing them to continue because they are small organizers? Or should the government take another step to look into the situation? And I like to ask the SWD for a figure. From 2012 to 2016, how many organizers have sustained deficits or losses all these years? And how many activities they conduct in a year? If there is just one per year, but it always sustains a deficit and you still approve their activities, then I think it's not very proper. Can you give us the figure? Yes, Chairman, that will be done. And also, as for the high administrative cost, and over 40%, and that is regarded as very high. In fact, we reviewed these cases. We do not rule out that some organizers don't do a good job, but we have reviewed these high administrative cost cases, and there are a few categories. The articles for sale may be costly from the start, and that, of course, will jack up the cost of the event. And secondly, they may recruit many volunteers who are given allowances, so that increases the cost. And number 3, the venue rental. As I said, religious activities may take part in very large venues, which fetch a high hiring fee. So I'd like to clarify, when the administrative cost is high, we really have to look at every case because they can be different. I absolutely agree that you should review every case. But some religious activities don't regard fundraising as a major part of the event because they are trying to spread their religion. That I can understand. And just now the director said that there may be charity sales, but then they use a lot of money to first of all, purchase the articles for sale. Now, to a certain extent, you can call this a business. You, first of all, procure the commodities, and they are costly, and then the market doesn't want them. You use a charity sale in a way to do a business, and first of all, you have to make the investment. I hope the SWD can consider this. Well, there can be different considerations. Some people say, I do a charity sale on the peak. The people on the peak have higher purchasing power, and the thing can be very different from having a charity sale in a poorer district. But the SWD should look into this. Are the articles procured for sale good value for money? If you pay a market price for those articles, you would only make a very narrow profit, and taking into manpower costs, transportation, and audit fees, you may sustain a deficit in the end. I think that goes against the purpose of the entire policy. Director, pardon me. I worked at the ICAC. I tend to think critically about certain issues. If there is not a problem, we don't have to discuss those things because we want to prevent problems from arising. Now, whether the situation now is serious, not so, I would say, but it is not satisfactory. I hope the director will consider the issue. And Chairman, allow me to make another point, please. Director, what I referred to is not the most serious part. The most serious part is the monthly donations. I have seen monthly donation companies daring tell organizers that I would go on the streets for you, but I want a commission. The commission is 90% for the first year. I'd like to ask director and other officials, but it should be the director, I think. It should belong to your jurisdiction. Or maybe not. Maybe the Bureau Secretary should take the question. Some are charity organizations, some are NGOs, and they solicit monthly donations in the streets. Some members of the public think those fundraisers are volunteers. They may think that it is a fund or an action plan, and then some animal organizations also put live dogs and cats on the streets to attract the public. But as far as I know, it's a business.
And this commission can be up to 90% in the first year. So what is the government's stance on this? Do you think it's a free market and you will allow them? So these companies plus the charitable organizations, if the administrative cost is so high, shouldn't you have a policy stating that this information should be disclosed, even not only in the government website, they have to also disclose that in the organization's website in a visible area. So these volunteers, they should also need to disclose in the monthly contributions that the company will take a commission of not less than so much percent, and the donor they are informed that in $100 donation, $90 will go to the volunteer, the salaried person, and the company. But usually the donating public, they are not aware of this information. So, and I think that is not ideal. So, director or the secretary, what is your perspective? So, under Cap 228, the direct debit contributions, could you elaborate your perspective, and this is direct debit. So could you respond? There were 2 questions. So these bodies, when they seek donations through direct debit, as Chairman said, under the legislation, collection of money in a public place, we had consulted legal opinion. There has to be a monetary transaction. In the future, if there is a monthly debit, that doesn't come under Cap 228. We are not empowered to deal with that. But as we discussed this morning, in our future response to LRC suggestions, this is an area that has to be dealt with. I also want to return back to a previous question about SWD when we receive applications of sales of memorabilia or souvenirs and whether it is accepted by the market. Well, every year we have to handle hundreds of applications. They have different items for sale in our application. The Institute has the responsibility. If they lose money, they will definitely follow up. So as we said just now, for loss-making bodies, we will look at their situation. I don't think I made myself clear. I'm concerned about the cost of these items. If their purchase cost was high, they can't sell it at a profit. We also asked a question about direct debit. So this is not covered under Cap 228. But we also have organizations who engage fundraising, commission-making companies, and they seek donations under the PSP. So there are actually 3 questions. So is there zero regulation, zero supervision? There's no supervision over direct debit. So these bodies, they engage a lot of donor collection. They use a lot of collecting staff to seek donations. So you had 3 questions. Chairman, you read my mind. You take the words out of my mouth. So we need an answer to write our report. Chairman, you also answered some of the questions. Regarding direct debit, I explained it is not covered under Cap 228. We are not empowered to deal with it. So we cannot exert any imposed conditions through a license. But under Cap 228, when they apply for a license, regarding their finances and audited report, the organization needs to list clearly their manpower expenses. That has to be stated in their income statement. So aside from submitting to Social Welfare Department, their website, their newsletter, their annual report has to disclose that information. So as we discussed this morning, if the one-stop finder is going to be updated, this is an area we can look at. In our reference guideline, we do have a requirement. The donor can ask if the collecting person is a volunteer, are they a salaried staff member, or are they a third-party agent? So the donor does have a right to this information. Mr. Lam, I recommend that SWD, if you are to disclose the income information, it can be done very briefly. The general public cannot read the financial statements. You just need 2 figures. The first, ratio of administrative fees to the gross proceeds and the actual proceeds and administrative expense. In the past few years, they need to disclose this information over the last few years. So whether it's the government website or the organization's website, if you just post an accountant's financial statement, the general public cannot understand that. Yes, in the audited financial report, it would be much more complex, and we need auditors to go through it, how they book the different expenses. But in our report, we do have a template for income statement. It states clearly the income and expenditure, including advertising, volunteer remuneration, the auditing costs. It doesn't have it does have a breakdown, and of course we can take on board members' views and see whether it can simplify it. We also want to answer to the public. Yes, you also need to ensure that the donating public are not being deceived. Well, we cannot conclude the third part, so let's conclude at 12:45 after Tanya's question, and allow us the time to do what we need to do. We do have work awaiting us later on. I have a question about administrative fee. In the past, there was a website called I Donate. I think it was a voluntary effort. They had financial reports, administrative fees, and they would compare whether the proceeds were used on the charity, the actual charity, or on administrative expenses. So I think Mr. Lamjutting's proposal is worth following up, but unfortunately this website I referred to has shut down. And so in paragraph 3.21 of the audit report, what is the situation? Just now we heard about the donor has the right to ask whether the fundraising person is a volunteer, a staff member, or an agent. But what if they provide a false answer? Are they accountable? Let me ask these questions first. The director, regarding the administrative fee, we don't have an area highlighting which part is administrative cost, but we pledged that under our lotteries fund consultative group, we have met with social welfare groups and the relevant stakeholders on the definition of administrative fees, and we hope that in the future we can reach a consensus and the public can have clearer guidelines. In the reference guideline I mentioned, we require the collection. The donor can ask the donation staff whether they are volunteers or salaried staff, and so on. So the people, if they lie, if there's a complaint, we can follow up. But of course, ultimately, can we prosecute? It will depend case by case. Chairman, in the paper, the director referred to a withholding list. I think that is quite serious. There are 8 companies where they have been required to submit a financial statement, and they had ignored the government's request. and of course, they seem to have been penalized by being on the withholding list. But we have 7 out of the 8 companies who are now raising funds over the internet. So what measures does SWD have aside from disclosing this withholding list? What else? What else can you do? We see 2 loopholes. We have a direct debit, a monthly direct debit done on the streets. That gives rise to Mr. Lam Chuk Ting's scenarios. And second, we now have internet fundraising. So you have blocked access to one route. So now they are collecting funds through other means. There's no penalty. There's no revocation of a license. So do the public have to pray for their own well-being? Well, Chairman, I'd like to clarify. If we have a late submission of information, the report refers to why do we allow to continue issuing license even if the submission of information is late. We have 90 days for them to provide an audited report. In the interim, if they haven't submitted the report before the deadline and they they apply for an extension, we have to treat that as an independent application. So being placed on the withholding list in the future, this is something I referred to this morning. We will see whether we can share this information with other departments, and we can discuss that. And I hope that at least under the existing legislation where we can issue licenses, we can communicate which organizations have not complied with the licensing requirement. Well, I want to follow up on the first case. In the first case study, the most dishonest part is that Institute A is on the withholding list. Well, then they just register under a new name and continue with their street fundraising. So in the audit report, so I would like to ask, how much information are you sharing with the other government agencies, such as IRD? How are you going to follow up? I think this is a rather serious case. If all agencies are like this, Agency A, if Agency A is on the withholding list, they register as Agency B or C, and in Section 88, should they be given a license in the first place? But we don't have a representative from IRD, so I'd like to ask. Well, on the 19th, they will have a representative on Friday. Yes, you can follow up. Director, the 2 organizations, they did not set up a new agency, Organization B. These 2 organizations in 2008, and they were established in 08 and 09. When they were established, they were 2 separate organizations. Of course, they were sister organizations. They have a connection. So they didn't set up a new organization after breaching the laws. So in not complying with our licensing application, we don't issue new licenses to them. In this case, that organization, in the 2 original licenses, they did not provide the audited financial report before the deadline. They made new applications, and we had granted them. And in Organization B, we have to look at that independently. We do have a lot of charitable organizations. The same organization might set up different units to handle different charity events. So we can't say A was late and B should be denied an application for a separate application. We are very careful if a organization in a similar application and they did not comply with licensing requirements, we will follow up and we will not issue new licenses. Well, if they are on the withholding list, and they set up a new organization, so you will look at it as as an individual application. So in case 1 that occurred in 0809, they were registered in 0809. So could you elaborate on case 1? In case 1, there were 2 organizations. They were established around the same time. So they didn't establish a new organization after the breach. So we agree with this concern. In the past, we had discussed this, and the licensing requirements have been studied. They cannot make an immediate license application after establishing. They need to submit the previous 3 years records in the charitable in the charitable industry. We thank you for this concern. I have a similar concern. Well, I'd like to clarify. Legislators ask you to communicate with other departments and exchange information. We do have a privacy ordinance, and this does not mean that you have to do what we're asking you. You have to. I hope we don't convey the wrong message. We're not asking you to dig into people's affairs. I'm just saying, if you have that information, you need to use that within your legal rights. A question about one-stop finder. Well, are you not going to follow up on case 2? Well, case 2, I'll save that for the chairman, because Kenneth might be more professional. They have accrued and cash basis issues. The one-stop finder, I had showed that to Mr. Siogafai. You have to go to GOVHK. There aren't many icons that you can click on. You have to type in the search box, and the public might not be aware that there's so much information there. And second, I want to ask, the LRC report has referred to it, but it's not in the audit report. It's about 1823.
Yes, 1823 is a one-stop shop as well. Is there any information for the colleagues amending the line so that information can be provided, or does the 1823 line provides the relay only? Well, that's not directly related to the audit report. It should be within report number 68. Now, there is no reference to 1823. We cannot go out of the report. Can you help out in respect of the use of 1823, just by way of educating the public? And can anyone answer the question? If not, then that's okay. Yes, the Deputy Secretary. When we talk with the departments, we have talked to the efficiency unit to see if we can make use of 1823 to make use of to enhance the service. The efficiency unit is willing to look into the use of 1823 to assist citizens in respect of inquiring about this. Is your question answered? Yes, Mr. Chairman. In the paper, there is such a reference, Gen 1. Yes, thank you so much for my questions. Good. Any further questions? No, then. Well, very well, then. We can end earlier. We will meet on the 9th of June because Mr. Leung will have to take a business trip. But we will see again on the 19th of May for Chapter 1. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Thank you. Thank you.